With the WINN FM News, I am Kevin Brown. Our top stories: NRP raises concerns over the state of the economy in Nevis. Daughter of St. Kitts-born doctor among victims in DC air collision. NRP's Patricia Bartlett responds to recent claims made by Nevis Premier Mark Brantley concerning Rest Haven development. Over $5 billion in expired drugs dumped in 2 years, according to Guyana opposition MP. St. Lucia's Alan Chastanet questions global ports holding deal amid head tax hike. Internationally, Israel releases 183 Palestinian prisoners and Hamas releases 3 Israeli hostages. Now, the details. The leader of the Nevis Reformation Party, NRP, the Honourable Dr. Janice Daniel Hodge, publicly expressed her frustrations with the Nevis Island Administration, NIA, which is led by the Concerned Citizens Movement, CCM. In a recent social media post, the leader of the NRP articulated pressing concerns about the CCM-led administration's priorities, particularly infrastructure and economic recovery efforts. In her statements, Daniel Hodge posed critical questions regarding resource allocation, particularly why road maintenance in Nevis appears to be sidelined in favor of similar projects in St. Kitts. Quote, when will the hard-working, tax-paying residents of Nevis become a priority for the CCM-led NIA? The Premier is proud to announce that the Department of Public Works equipment and trained workers are busy working on the roads in St. Kitts, she stated, raising the alarming issue that roads such as the one from Westbury to Mount Lily remain neglected. Through her inquiries, she insinuated that the NIA might lack the financial means to maintain essential services within Nevis and demanded clarity on the financial logistics of the workers' engagement in St. Kitts. Moreover, the leader criticized the administration's newly introduced policies, particularly the Returning National and Diaspora Investment Policy, for not supporting small businesses still recuperating from the economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Quote, we ought to move expeditiously to help those who are already investing blood, sweat, and tears day in and day out in Nevis's struggling economy, she emphasized, advocating for immediate and robust action to aid local enterprises instead of focusing solely on attracting external investors. Dr. Patricia Bartlett, a prominent candidate for the NRP, echoed similar sentiments regarding the economic stagnation on the island.
Right now, our unemployment rate, even though he's not admitting it, is too high,
indicating a pervasive issue hindering community engagement and economic growth. Dr. Bartlett critiqued the government's perceived lack of initiative in stimulating the local economy, arguing that reliance on the Citizenship by Investment CBI program has exacerbated existing economic issues rather than presenting sustainable solutions. She further articulated concerns regarding the transparency of the government and the Premier's claim of an anticipated revenue shortfall linked to a reduction in value-added tax VAT, suggesting that the administration's approach has been misleading at best.
I don't know that I can believe him that is what the loss is going to be for us, because it's just for 6 months. And ordinarily, they're not going to collect that much in the first 6 months of the year in any event. So I don't know, but I think that he has anticipated that there would be a shortfall even before the effects of the reduced VAT, because he has not been forthright with the people of Nevis as it relates to the state of the economy. So things are not as robust, in Nevis, and I don't think that he would have been able to realize the kind of money is coming back from the VAT in the first instance, but he has relied heavily on the CBI receipts, and I think that in itself is impacting us even more so than any other element.
Reflecting skepticism about the Premier's fiscal projections. Ultimately, both NRP representatives call for accountability from the CCM-led NIA, underscoring the urgent need to re-evaluate priorities to enhance Nevis's economic and infrastructural well-being. A civil rights attorney, Kia Duggins, was among those who were tragically killed on January 29, 2025, when an American Airlines regional jet collided with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter near the Ronald Reagan National Airport. She was among 64 passengers and crew aboard the American Airlines flight, which fell into the Potomac River after impact. Kia Duggins was born in Wichita, Kansas, to her mother Gwen Duggins and Dr. Maurice Duggins, a St. Kitts-born physician practicing family medicine in Wichita. The 30-year-old was the first victim from Wichita identified from the crash site. Kia attended the Wichita Public School and also graduated from the Harvard Law School. She was set to join the faculty at Harvard Law School in fall 2025. Though short-lived, she made a solid contribution to her community and the American justice system. She fought for a better world, particularly against unconstitutional policing and money bail practices, and was known for her dedication to prison abolition and justice reform. Kia was also a Fulbright scholar and a beauty pageant contestant. Kittians and Nivisians at home and in the diaspora have reacted to Kia's tragic passing. Some barely could fathom what caused this tragedy. One person said, quote, "When I heard the news, it wrenched every fiber of my heart. May she rest in peace, and my condolences to her family." Another person said, quote, "So heartbreaking. Rest in peace, beautiful young queen. My sincere condolences, and may God provide comfort and peace to the hearts of her family and loved ones and friends." A third person expressed, quote, "Terribly sad, the tragedy reaching all the way back to the Federation," end quote. Meanwhile, on Friday, January 31st, Fire and Emergency Services personnel in Washington, D.C. said the body of Kia and over 40 others were recovered from the wreckage. The cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder from the airline, also known as black boxes, have been recovered and will aid in the investigation. The Honorable Mark Brantley, the Premier of Nevis, recently criticized the Nevis Reformation Party NRP for its decision to acquire the abandoned Rest Haven property. During a recent press conference, he stated that this action has left Nevis burdened with over $30 million in debt, a financial strain that he equates to a substantial mistake for which future generations will have to answer.
I just want to say that that is what happens when you have reckless decisions made. People feel that government is some kind of joke sometimes. But you and I and our children now have to find $30 million. They used to, the NRP had a slogan one time on a road that was done, which had some difficulty. They say it was a $10 million mistake. Remember that, Mr. Hanley? $10 million mistake. Well, Rest Haven is a $30 million mistake. Because up to now, your past the Rest Haven property is still abandoned. People of Nevis have got no value from it.
Premier Brantley elaborated on the complexities surrounding the Rest Haven situation in the press conference. He described how his government had to announce a debt of approximately $30 million in their last budget. Brantley clarified that this was not due to new spending, but rather the first formal acknowledgement of debts that had existed but had not previously been fully booked. The Premier pointed out that the issue arose from a long-standing debt associated with Rest Haven Limited, which previously owned the property.
That land was mortgaged to Kishu Chandaramani from Rams, who is now deceased of blessed memory,
revealing how the debt originated and evolved. Brantley took particular aim at claims made by the NRP, which he accused of misleading the public regarding the origins and management of this debt. He recounted how the property's original valuations and acquisition notices were issued during NRP's governance. Documents from 2007 indicated a public declaration was made during the compulsory acquisition of the property for touristic development. However, Brantley lamented that despite this purported intent, no documented plans have ever emerged to illustrate what such development would entail. The Premier pointed out the convoluted history of legal actions connected to Rest Haven, which saw various valuations over the years and ongoing disputes involving the NRP's previous administration and the heirs of Chandramani. In this back and forth, Brantley outlined how from 2007 to 2013, while the land remained in limbo, the interest on the debt continued to accrue, further complicating the financial landscape.
On the 26th of September 2013, now, you see I've jumped now 5 years to 2013. Because what happened, members of the press, is that between the time when the property was acquired in 2007, under the NRP-led administration, and 2013 when government changed, they never settled the amount that was due for compensation. When we got back into government in 2013, we had to go to a board of assessment, which is a requirement under the law when there's a dispute as to what value should be paid for the property. And the board of assessment, chaired by Thomas Astafan, now Thomas Astafan, King's Counsel out of Anguilla, they awarded and said that the property was valued at US $6,362,313.88. They ordered costs against the government, and they ordered that this money, that US $6,362,316.88, attract interest at the rate of 6%, retroactive to the time of acquisition. I hope members of the press, you're understanding what I'm saying. So the 6% became payable from 2007.
This acknowledgement of debt has resulted in the Nevis government now grappling with immense financial pressures. Brantley particularly criticized the NRP's lack of foresight in handling the acquisition, asserting that it was an ill-considered decision. He posed critical questions regarding the absence of tangible plans or development proposals that would justify the compulsory acquisition of the property.
And it's only about 2 acres of property, 2.6 to be precise. And $30 million is the most expensive piece of real estate in the whole of St. Kitts and Nevis. Bad decisions have consequences.
In direct response to Premier Brantley's statements, Dr. Patricia Bartlett, candidate for the NRP, addressed the press in an interview highlighting her party's perspective on the situation.
Yes, in response to what the Premier has been saying, he has just been trying to cover up the mishandling of the entire thing as it relates to the West Haven property.
Bartlett argued that the NRP had initially negotiated a valuation of $3 million for the property, and subsequent management by the current administration led to escalating costs and debts.
And so they then settled in 2014 or thereabout for an amount that far exceeded the $3 million that NRP had left there, you know. And so they settled on, I think, $6 million US. But they still did not pay the bill at that point in time,
indicating that the settlement had been pushed upward without proper management. She further criticized Brantley's administration for dragging out payments, which inflated the debt due to accruing interest.
For a grand total of $27,653,520 is what they ended up paying to settle the West Haven, which they claim was abandoned by NRP, but NRP had no opportunity to settle the bill.
Moreover, she argued that had the NRP been given the opportunity, they would have resolved the debt for a mere $3 million rather than the exorbitant amounts that were eventually paid under Brantley's administration. Through her insights, she suggested that the current government's failure to implement developmental plans has stunted job opportunities and economic growth, compounding the challenges faced by the citizens of Nevis.
The difficulty has been, though, that CCM has never really wanted to embrace the plans, the initial plans that NRP had left in place, but they themselves didn't have any plans, any alternate plans to at least use the facility to provide for jobs for the people of Nevis, but it could have impacted us, you know, significantly in terms of the provision of jobs for the people, because right now our unemployment rate, even though he's not admitting it, is too high. It's really too high, and we have too many people who are idle and not fully engaged in the process of building the economy.
Bartlett lamented the lack of development initiatives that could harness the potential of the West Haven location for tourism, essentially a lost opportunity that further burdens the island's economy. In regional news, over $5 billion in expired drugs dumped in 2 years, according to Guyana opposition MP. Guyana News source reports.
Opposition Member of Parliament Valdo Lawrence has called out the government for its management of the healthcare sector, which has seen over $5.9 billion in expired drugs and medications being dumped over the past 2 years. MP Lawrence, who served as Minister of Health under the APNU-AFC administration, said after it took office in 2020, the current government complained bitterly about the $742 million in expired items it inherited. She said there is absolute silence now that it has found itself dumping billions of dollars more in drugs that it procured.
The Auditor General said that for the period January 2022 to June 2024, just 2.5 years, Guyana threw away some $5.974 billion in expired drugs. In 4 months, sir, between January to April 2022, $413.3 million were thrown away. For the year 2023, $1,306,000 were thrown away. From January to June, 6 months in 2024, that's last year, my boy uppy game to $1.923 billion, 6 months. And sir, at June, that's very June, they had on hand for disposal $2.332 billion.
Lawrence argued further that when overpayments and disposable drugs are added, some $9.4 billion has been wasted.
Mind you, sir, this amount of $9.413 billion only represents 2 areas of the entire budget. I'm calling for investments in drugs and medical supplies to be quantified and managed correctly.
She also expressed the hope that steps will be taken to fast-track the digitization of the health sector systems to prevent or minimize wastage. In the interim, she said the Minister of Health, Dr. Frank Anthony, may want to use artificial intelligence like the US, the UK, Spain, Italy, and other countries to provide data faster and more accurately. Earlier in her contribution to the House, the opposition MP said the government will soon engage in a spending spree at a time when Guyanese are living paycheck to paycheck, with 48% of the country living in poverty. She said while the budget includes a number of piecemeal measures, those measures are wholly inadequate and will bring little benefit to the people of Guyana. Citing the issuance of that one-off $100,000 cash grant, Lawrence said the grant would only temporarily fill the empty pockets of Guyanese.
That, Mr. Speaker, is the reality. Budget 2025 is putting a large bandage over a festering sore. This purulent sore to which I am alluding is the inescapable poverty besetting some 50% of our nation. And I want to elaborate, Mr. Speaker, on the stranglehold in which the ordinary people of Guyana are caught and which Budget 2025 has not effectively and adequately addressed.
The opposition member of parliament said while the $5,000 increase on the old age pension and the $3,000 increase in public assistance are steps in the right direction, those increases will have little to no effect on the lives of many of the pensioners, especially those who have no other source of income.
The cost of living is exorbitant, and so are healthcare costs and other miscellaneous expenses, which daily encumber the pockets of our elderly. Budget 2025 is themed Improving the Lives of Guyanese. But alas, Honorable Minister, the well-being of our pensioners is being eroded as they grapple with the stark realities of not having enough to offset the tentacles of poverty.
To cushion the steep rise in the cost of living, Lawrence suggested that housing for the very poor be subsidized, and she also said other measures should be put in place to bring an ease to the people. She made a case. General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, Vice President Bara Jagdeo, has announced that he will be leading a team from his party to meet with the Guyana Elections Commission next Tuesday to be updated on issues related to the commission and the upcoming elections. He said he intends to also use the meeting to debunk statements which have been made by the opposition about the commission's preparedness to host general and regional elections this year.
St. Lucia's Alan Chastanet questions Global Port's holding deal amid head tax hike. DBS St. Lucia has the details.
Opposition leader Alan Chastanet is once again questioning how the Global Port's holding deal will benefit the country. At a press conference earlier this week, he revealed that the government had increased its cruise passenger head tax from January 1st, 2025, citing a notice from the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association to its member cruise lines. The letter indicated that the in-transit passenger fee had risen by 100% from $5 per passenger to $10. Additionally, the environmental levy had increased from $150 to $250. According to Chastanet, GPH would receive the bulk of this tax, and if the government had not made a deal with the port management company, this revenue would have benefited the country. With this increase in income, he believes the country could have performed its own port upgrades without the necessity for GPH. According to him, the government was advised against entering into the current agreement with GPH.
It is my clear understanding, and I have evidence to substantiate that the Ministry of Finance, technical staff, advised the government not to do the deal with GPH. And that is when it was at $6.50. That's how much we were collecting before, $6.50. $1.50 was going to solid waste, $2.50 was going to SLASPA, and $2.50 was going to the government of St. Lucia. In fact, the Ministry of Finance said it would be better for the government of St. Lucia to forego its $2.50 and allow SLASPA to get $5, because with the $5, they can more than cover the cost of the loan, of the $18 million loan, and they would have had enough money over the years to do the development themselves. Let's understand, it is SLASPA who built Point Seraphin. It is the government of St. Lucia who built the Vendors Arcade. It is SLASPA who built Place Carnage. So there was nothing that's in this proposal that the government of St. Lucia, either through SLASPA or a different entity, has not done themselves.
The opposition United Workers' Party, who had also been in talks with GPH before leaving office, has repeatedly criticized the deal with GPH, claiming it is unfavorable, accusing the SLP administration of selling the island's main seaport. However, the government has denied these allegations, asserting that GPH will be undertaking extensive upgrades to the Castries port and the Soufrière waterfront. Additionally, GPH has eliminated a $20 million debt from SLASPA's books. Chastanet, however, argues that the government is missing out on tens of millions of dollars.
The recent announcement that the head tax in January went from $6.50 to $12.50, where $10 now is going to go to GPH, $1 is going to the government of St. Lucia, and $1.50 is going to go to solid waste, is horrifying and reveals the scam and the level of the corruption that has taken place. Why on earth, if the government of St. Lucia was prepared to go to $12.50, so imagine in that $12.50, the $1.50 for solid waste, government of St. Lucia could have still gotten its $2.50, and SLASPA would have gotten $9. So you're talking about, in 40 years' time, over $400 million US. And to Minister Joseph's point, they could have done everything, including they could have built the cruise ship terminal in Vieux Fort.
The UWP has repeatedly called for details of the GPH agreement to be made public, pointing to early pronouncements by the Tourism and Investment Minister, Dr. Ernest Hilaire, that this would have been done once the agreement was settled. The government signed this concessionary agreement with GPH in August 2023.
And to make it even more suspicious to all of us is that GPH started off as being a public company. And 6 months ago, it was announced that they had become now a private company. So whereas we were getting information on GPH, now we're getting none. And that there is information out to say that the main shareholders of GPH have sold 60% of the shares, 66% of the shares. So we don't even know who the owner is. And again, like CIP, the money is coming in and going straight out to a third party, a foreign company, who turned around now and did what? Hired friends of the minister.
On April 30th, 2024, the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority, SLASPA, officially transferred the management of its cruise port operations to GPH. In May last year, GPH announced the commencement of its $145 million port improvement upgrade of Port Castries and the Soufrière waterfront, which includes a major facelift to the Vendors Arcade and the construction of a fisherman's village at Barnans Bay. For the DBS News World, Zane Romulus reported.
We now bring you these international reports.
The fourth exchange of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners has taken place under the fragile ceasefire agreement reached between Israel and Hamas. The names of the 3 Israeli male hostages were announced on Friday, and shortly after 8:30 local time on Saturday, Ofer Calderon, a dual French-Israeli citizen, was the first to be released in a well-organized handover to the International Red Cross in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. A few minutes later, he was followed by Yarden Bibas, the father of 2 infant children, believed to have died along with their mother during their captivity in Gaza. Now, after receiving their papers, the pair were then driven away by the Red Cross and were officially handed over to the Israel Defense Forces. They were then taken to hospital where they received medical checks and were reunited with family members. The third named hostage, Keith Segal, was handed over in a separate ceremony in Gaza City. The 65-year-old was kidnapped with his wife Aviva Segal in the October the 7th Hamas attacks. Aviva was released after 51 days in captivity and a temporary truce deal in November 2023. And in exchange, a Palestinian advocacy group says Israel is releasing 183 prisoners, more than double the figure previously reported. This was seen as a bus containing 25 prisoners was greeted in Ramallah. The other group of prisoners headed back to Gaza, and this was seen in the past half hour as 3 more busloads of Palestinian prisoners arrived back in Khan Yunis. Well, let's go to Jerusalem and speak to our correspondent Joe Inwood. Joe, bring us up to date.
The latest 3 buses, I think it was, of people who were in Israeli jails, Palestinians from Israeli jails, being released back into their communities. Now, it's worth pointing out that some of those people have been in detention for a very long time, accused of very serious crimes, but others have been arrested far more recently and were people who are being held on what's known as administrative detention here in Israel. Israel's critics say they are being held without charge. You had emotional scenes, people mobbing the buses, some people trying to climb up the side in order to touch the hands of their family members. And they are now being released as part of this deal. This is the second part of an exchange. The first part was the release of those 3 men, Keith Segal, Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon. They were released in what can only be described as a very stage-managed process, with Hamas fighters flanking them and posters behind them of Hamas leaders who've been killed. So this process has been much more organised, much less chaotic than the one we saw on Thursday, and therefore has gone through far more smoothly, I think, and I think probably will be to the satisfaction of both sides more than the events we saw a few days ago.
And tell us what the latest is with Yarden Bibas, Ofer Calderon and Keith Segal. We understand that they're now headed to a medical facility or should have arrived there already.
Yeah, we've seen pictures coming through over the last hour or so of these 3 men, certainly of 2 of them, Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon. I've seen really emotional scenes as they're reunited with their families. We saw Ofer Calderon being hugged by his 4 children. It was clearly a very, very emotional moment for them. And Yarden Bibas with 2 of his relatives as well. Now, of course, for the Bibas family, this is a bittersweet day because Yarden was taken on October the 7th, along with his wife Shiri and Ariel and Kafir, their 2 young children. These 2 young red-headed boys being taken away, held by their mother, was one of the defining images of that day, and it became it, certainly. And I think the fact that Yarden has been released and those 3 have not is being taken as a sign that they are no longer alive. I mean, we don't have confirmation of that, we should say, but it was said by Hamas back in November 2023, so soon after the attacks, that they had been killed, died in an Israeli airstrike. That's never been confirmed by the Israeli government. But I think the fact that they've not been part of this deal and the Israelis have not pushed for them to be part of this first part of the deal suggests that they are no longer alive, because there's quite strict rules about the order in which people are released, and a mother, a civilian woman and 2 young children really would have been in the early stages of this, and the fact they're not, I think, is being read here as I say, an indication that they are no longer alive.
And Joe, as you mentioned, the Israeli government has not confirmed that statement from Hamas that Ariel and Kafir Bivas were killed in an Israeli airstrike. I just want to read out a statement from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, saying, "Welcome home, Yadin Bibas, Ofer Calderon and Keith Segal, along with all the citizens of Israel and many around the world. My wife and I embrace you upon your return. Our thoughts are now with Shiri, Ariel, Kafir Bivas, and all our abductees. We'll continue to work to bring them home." So, Joe, once again, pointing to the fact that there is still more work to be done to bring back all those Israeli hostages.
Yeah, this is a 3-part process, and we're only in stage 1 of the ceasefire agreement. That first stage saw 33 hostages named as coming back, but there's now a process of negotiation that has to take place between Israel and Hamas, coordinated by the Qataris, the Egyptians, the Americans, to work out how a temporary ceasefire is transformed into something more long-term and something which will see many, many more Palestinians released and the remaining Israeli hostages released. So there's a process. It's set out. The deal between them has never been formally released, but we have seen leaks of it. And there's, according to those leaks, a clear order in which people are released, with women first, then male civilians and also female soldiers in that, and then eventually we move on to the male soldiers, and then the bodies of hostages who have died will be right at the end. So we're going to go through this process assuming it holds, and I think that is really worth bearing in mind, that although things are progressing as smoothly as either side could hope at the moment, there's no guarantee that this carries on. You have in Israel, you've got really, really strong pressure from the hostage families, and I know we've been speaking to them live throughout the day here on BBC News, and you hear from them that they want to get the families home, whatever the deal that needs to be done. But there are other pressures in this country, and there are other parts, certainly within politics, on the far right of politics here, and we should bear in mind that the coalition government of Benjamin Netanyahu has been dependent upon the far right for its survival. People who do not want to see a continuation of this deal. They want to see a resumption of the fighting. They think that destroying Hamas is a goal that should be achieved, really whatever the cost. And I think that the feeling from hostage families is that the cost that the far right are willing to pay is the remaining hostages. Now, there's a real tension here, and whether this deal continues is something which is going to come down to how the kind of political forces in this country can balance off against each other. And also, it is worth pointing out the role of the Americans, and notably Steve Witkoff, who's the new special envoy here to the Middle East, and of course new President Donald Trump. Because one of the things we've been hearing from the hostage families is they credit him, and they've mentioned him repeatedly, with being the person who has got this deal done. I think there are those in America on the Democratic side of politics who would say, actually, the deal that we've seen here was the one that was suggested by President Joe Biden, former President Joe Biden, back in, I believe, May of last year. And I think it's also been said there was a lot of careful work between former President Biden's aides and now President Trump's aides to get this deal over the line. But here it's President Trump that's getting the credit for this. And I think the hostage families are going to be hoping that his self-proclaimed status as a peacemaker and, of course, as a deal maker is something which is going to see this deal continue and therefore the continued release of hostages. But that really is something we're going to have.
When it comes to America's trading partners, the big three are Mexico, Canada, and to a lesser extent, China. Now U.S. President Donald Trump says he will target all three with tariffs, 25% for both Mexico and Canada, 10% for China. According to the Census Bureau, those countries account for 41% of all goods imported and exported from the U.S.
We have big deficits with, as you know, with all three of them. And in one case, they're sending massive amounts of fentanyl, killing hundreds of thousands of people a year with the fentanyl. And in the other two cases, they're making it possible for this poison to get in.
The White House did not release a complete list of targeted products, but Trump did say he would be imposing tariffs later on Canadian oil. Experts say that will cause gas prices in the U.S. to spike. And the countries have vowed their own retaliatory tariffs. Canadian officials have said they'll go after the states and companies that supported Trump's re-election. It could mean fruit from Florida, manufacturing from Michigan, or dairy products from Wisconsin.
If tariffs are implemented against Canada, we will respond. We won't relent until tariffs are removed, and of course, everything is on the table.
And Mexico is also promising retribution.
The U.S. consumers would be affected, in the first place, because prices would be higher, meaning prices would increase by 25%. Secondly, because there will be fewer available products, since if you put a 25% tariff on a product, obviously demand dwindles. Finally, there may be problems with the supply chain because such high tariffs have a ripple effect. That is, not only in the short term, but also in the long run.
President Trump has repeatedly said foreign governments pay for the tariffs. They do not. Importers do, and most often pass the increase along to consumers, which Trump seemed to acknowledge when speaking to reporters on Friday. That is what happened during Trump's first-term trade war, but that was when inflation was low. It's not now. Many voters cast their ballot for Trump because he promised to bring costs down for groceries and gas. Trump potentially gambling they'll still support him if he breaks the promise that was central to his campaign and win. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
It is 80 kilometers from Belgrade to Novi Sad. The procession of students continued its journey. Joined by farmers, cheered on by passers-by, a sign of the growing resentment at institutional corruption many feel is widespread in Serbia. Since November, when 15 people were killed after the canopy of the newly refurbished railway station in Novi Sad collapsed, impatience with the government has only grown, as have the almost daily protests. Refusing to give up, even when targeted by attacks, some by pro-government supporters.
I mean, you're always worried about your safety when you're going against something, but it honestly wakes us up even more to just keep going and not allow it to happen anymore and to anyone else.
And so they continue.
Well, these blockades are part of the largest protest seen in Serbia in recent times. And it's not just students, but it's citizens right across society who are deeply frustrated, angered at what they're saying is political dysfunction in the country.
At this 15 minutes of silence to commemorate those who died in Novi Sad, others joined the students protesting against corruption.
I'm hopeful that some changes will happen, and I would like that everything is as it should be in this country, to have the rule of law, and that's it.
And it is a challenge that the government has been unable so far to control. This week, the Prime Minister Miloš Vučević announced his resignation, as well as the mayor of Novi Sad, an attempt at damage limitation or an opportunity to call snap elections to shore up support.
The President has offered an additional possibility to convene an advisory referendum on his impeachment, actually to ask the people whether he still has their support or not. But we need to respect the will of the people, and I'm speaking about the entire electorate, not just about a very loud group of people who are currently protesting on the streets.
The strength of this movement shows no sign of dissipating, growing beyond the cities into the countryside, calling for political transparency and an end to corruption. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, Belgrade.
You were listening to the WINN FM 98.9 newscast. Our top stories were: NRP raises concerns over the state of the economy in Nevis. Daughter of St. Kitts-born doctor among victims in D.C. air collision. NRP's Patricia Bartlett responds to recent claims made by Nevis Premier Mark Brantley concerning Rest Haven development. Over $5 billion in expired drugs dumped in 2 years, according to Guyana opposition MP. St. Lucia's Alan Chastanet questions global ports holding deal amid head tax hike. Internationally, Israel releases 183 Palestinian prisoners and Hamas releases 3 Israeli hostages. Thank you for listening.